Hello, today I'm going to show you how to make almond puff. This is one of the recipes from my Betty Crocker files. It's a quick and easy dessert to make, wonderful for dessert, for coffee, for brunch. It's got a slight crust, so when you make it, you're going to make the crust first. Then there's the puff pastry layer, or the pastry layer, and then you've got a glaze with some crushed nuts on the top of it. To make the almond puff, we're going to start by preheating our oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I have an ungreased griddle ready for the dough. You could also use a regular baking sheet if you prefer. Now when we make our almond puff, as I showed you, there is a crust, a pastry layer, and then the glaze. So for the crust, I'm going to use 1 cup of flour, a half cup or 1 stick of butter, and 2 tablespoons of water. For the pastry portion, or the puff portion, I'll use another cup of flour, another stick of butter, or another half cup of butter, a cup of water, a teaspoon of almond extract, and 3 eggs. For the glaze, I'll use a cup and a half of powdered sugar, or confectioner's sugar, another 2 tablespoons of butter, 1 to 2 tablespoons of water, and then I have some chopped walnuts to go on the top of the pastry. You could use chopped almonds if you prefer, but I think you get enough almond flavor from the extract, and the walnuts add a little more different flavor to it. So I'm going to start by actually getting the water and the butter starting to heat for my pastry. So I'm going to put 1 stick of butter, or a half cup of butter, in my pot. And I'm simply going to pour the water right into there. And we're going to put this on a low or medium heat. We'll eventually need it to boil, but we don't want it to boil until we're ready for it. So I'm just going to put that back there to start heating while we make the pastry. To make the pastry, I'm going to put 1 cup of flour in my bowl. Always stir up your flour, so you'll end up with too much flour. It can pack down if you don't stir it up. And this is a half cup scoop, so 2 scoops will give me 1 cup. I'm going to add a stick of butter, or a half cup of butter, to that. And I'm going to use my pastry blender to simply chop up that butter into the flour. And this takes just 1 minute to do. Once this is made, we'll add the water and spread it out on the griddle there. Butter sticking to your blender, just knock it off and work it in. You could also use a food processor to mix up the butter and flour. Okay. I usually take the pastry blender and I kind of scrape the sides of the bowl a little bit, make sure you get the flour on the bottom, incorporate it. And I think we're pretty good here, so I'll just clean off my pastry cutter, and then I'm going to stir in a little bit of water, and then we'll divide the dough in half. And we can put it on there. So I've got 2 tablespoons of water in my little glass here. Just add that in and stir to mix. So I'm just going to stir this up until it makes a little ball here. And Let's turn that out on the counter. Or on our work mat. And we're just going to basically divide that in half. Get 2 balls about the same size. And what I actually like to do, so I want to make this into a 12 by 3 strip on the pan, but I find it easiest to actually stretch it out a little bit before I even try and put it on the pan. Try and get a little bit of a tube or a thing going here. Almost probably, that's probably close to 11 inches right now. This little guy has 6 inches, so there's 1, 2, he's just shy of 12 inches. By the time I smash him down a little bit, we'll get him 12 inches. So I'm just going to press this. You see thin spots, trying to smush some over. And again, this is, okay. I have a little measuring gauge on there. It's kind of worn off, but it's 6 inches across and 3 for half of it. So we're just about there. And then we'll repeat that with this other half. So again, I start by just kind of rolling this into a little bit of a tube, try and get some length out of it while it's, you know, on the counter. It's a little easier. So I just kind of worked it a little bit, and then we'll set it over here. And let's see again, that might have been a little longer than 12. Okay, we got 12 inches there. So we're just going to get it over to 3 inches. So again, you want about a 12 by 3 strip here. I'm just kind of squaring that up a little bit. So I've got it fairly even. I've got a 12 by 3 pat there. I can set this aside and I can get to work on my pastry portion. This is actually what they call a choux pastry if you ever watch cooking shows. And I'm just going to move this up to the front burner so it'll be a little easier to work with. Tear that back burner off. This is what they use to make cream puffs and eclairs with. Now we've got a good rolling boil going here. You see how this is? It's boiling very vigorously. It's not just simmering, it's really boiling quite hard, and that's what you want it to be. It's called a rolling boil. So I'm going to move this off the heat for 1 second. Turn that heat down to low. I'm going to add a teaspoon of almond extract and my flour, and I'm going to put this back on low heat and stir for about a minute, and it's going to form into a ball here. But the flour is going to come together. All the flour will be melted or in there. There won't be any more lumps, and we got a little ball going. So once that's mixed in, we can take it off, and we're going to dump our eggs all at once. That's 3 eggs, and we're going to stir, and it's going to look kind of funky for a little bit and all sloppy, and it's going to come together and turn smooth. Once this is smooth, we will spread this on our crust there and pop it in the oven for 1 hour. So it's still kind of sloppy. Doesn't look good yet. Just give it another minute here. Just keep stirring. Let's put her back down in there. Whoops. And you can see it's starting to change a little bit. It's not quite so sloppy. Almost there. Okay, do you see how that's changed? You've got a nice, smooth mixture. So I'm going to take a big spoonful of this. Just kind of dribble it down there. Another spoonful and dribble that down this one. And just kind of divide it up between the two of them. And just spread this across them. Get the rest of this out of our pan here. And as I said, this is similar to an eclair or a cream puff mixture. You would tape it in little balls or make little balls out of it if you were making an eclair or cream puffs. But we're going to instead make the almond puff pastry here. So I'm just spreading this. Doesn't have to be particularly neat, but you want a reasonably even layer of it. So it'll bake evenly. And we'll spread some over here. And go out all the way to your edge of your crust. But you also want to hang over it just to the edges. So I've got the puff pastry spread on the crust in a reasonably even layer. And we're going to throw this in the oven for 60 minutes or 1 hour. So I'm simply going to slide this into the oven. You know, it always helps to check your oven to make sure you don't have any other pans or anything left in the oven before you try and put your pan for baking. You should always do that when you go to preheat your oven. Check that your shelf is in the right spot and there's nothing else in your oven. So I'm going to set my timer for 1 hour and we'll come back here when it's done. It's been 1 hour. Our puff pastry is golden and puffed and crisp. You can see that pastry has puffed up some. Now we will simply transfer this. Oops, I'll get out a cooling rack and we'll put it on a cooling rack for a few minutes. And then we can ice it once it's cooled down slightly. If you ice it while it's too hot, the icing will melt on you. So I'm just going to put, as you see, put a spatula in from either side and transfer it over to my cooling rack. So we have our crust and then that pastry layer puffed up. And once that's cooled just a little bit, we will add our glaze and our nuts to the top of it. Our almond puff has cooled off. It's not completely cold, but it is cool, fairly cool to touch. So now is the time to go to make our icing. As I said, 1.5 cups of powdered sugar. We've got our 2 tablespoons of butter, and I'm just going to mix that up in there a little bit. And I'm going to add a teaspoon of almond extract. And I'm also going to add a little bit of vanilla extract. I like to use a little bit of each of them in there. And again, I'm just going to stir that up a little bit, get that mixed, get the butter distributed through there. And I'm going to add 1 to 2 tablespoons of water. You need to add your water slowly or in sections. You usually don't need all of it, so I'm going to start with about half of it and stir that up. And as you can see, it doesn't take a lot of water to change it to a fairly easily spreadable icing. Whoops. It's okay, I probably got enough left in there. I just needed a hair more. So just mix that up good. Okay, once that is mixed in, just going to take our icing and spread a little bit of it on each of these. And just spread that out and across them. Yeah, if you do this while it's too warm, it will melt your icing. Make sure you get your ends good. Don't want to chip the people that get the end slices. And we'll spread this one. And we're just going to spread this out on the pastry. So, other than a little bit of time for baking, you'll see it didn't take me a lot of time to make this. Just a few minutes to mix up the crust and the filling. One last thing we want to do here, and I actually want to move this over to my cutting board before I put the nuts on so they don't bounce all through the... So I'm just going to slide this right over to the cutting board. Oops. Probably should have used the other spatula there. And I'm just going to sprinkle some nuts here down the center. I think I've got a little more than I need actually. Again, I'm using walnuts. You could use almonds. You know, some people like, since it's an almond flavor, they want to use the almonds on the top so you can show what it is. You could use pecans, hazelnuts, cashews, peanuts, whatever kind of nuts you happen to like. So just a little sprinkling of nuts on the top. I usually like to just give them a little bit of a pat, help them stick down in that icing while the icing's still wet. That way they don't go sliding off on you. And we've got almond puff pastry ready for sampling. So you're just going to cut this in thin slices. About like that is a nice slice. So we've got, as you can see, your crust and then your puff layer and then the little bit of a glaze and nuts on the top.
Very yummy.
We hope you've enjoyed this video and almond puff. If so, please like and share, and please and subscribe to this channel for more tasty cooking and cast iron. Thank you and happy baking.